So we're looking at rendered beef fat, and this is just some scraps that have been rendered and filtered one time. This one's actually been rendered twice, and I'm going to finish this one up in just a moment for its third rendering. And this is a third rendering. And so when we get in here close, I've got some pretty good lighting. You'll see it's just white, very creamy white. There are no spots, certainly no brown, and as in this one, there's still a little yellow tint. We're going to get all of that out, and I'll show you exactly how in just a moment. Making beef tallow is not rocket science, and it is not complicated. You just start by scrapping the fat from your beef, and I happen to have a lot of brisket that we prepare every week, and so I save all of the scraps, and in this case there's quite a bit of meat tissue left on the fat. That's perfectly fine. We're going to use that to make some gelatin and pocket soup, and that's also a great product from your beef. So beef tallow is useful for so many different things, and depending on how you're going to use it, you'll continue to render it to get the purest form of tallow. But this can be used for making candles, it can be used for waterproofing fabrics and materials, it can be used for food preservation, it can be used as a salve and as a skin treatment. There's just so many different ways that you can use it. Of course, you can use it to treat your cast iron and season your cast iron. You can use it in regular cooking from time to time and day to day. So there's a lot of ways to use your tallow. So to keep this simple, let me reduce this to 3 simple steps. First is scrapping. And so we're just going to take these scraps, the amount of meat versus fat doesn't really matter. And in this case, we're just going to break it down. I want to cut this down to 1-inch maximum chunks, and that's going to allow it to render quickly. The next portion is rendering. We're going to get that into an oven or a crock pot. Now, ideally, you want to render this at temperatures between 170 degrees and up to 200. Anything over 200 and you start experiencing the Maillard effect on the fat and the tissue, and you're going to get some browning. It's going to make it difficult to clean and purify this and get nice, clean tallow. And if you're going to use this cosmetically, you certainly want that. I typically don't worry too much about time at this temperature. I just want that to render down. In fact, sometimes mine stays in the oven overnight, 12 to 14 hours, and then we simply pour that rendered fat off and start cleaning it. So when I'm processing out that brisket, I end up with all these fat trimmings, and I'll set those aside. I'm going to cut them up into some smaller chunks, because we want this to render fairly quickly. And then we're going to get these into the oven as well, just to render off that fat, and then we'll trim off the gelatin. I find it helpful to add maybe 2 or 3 cups of water to the pieces that I'm rendering as it's rendering. This allows it to carry the particulates to the bottom. Now, once I have rendered fat, I'm going to run that through a sieve or filter like you see here. In this case, it's just cheesecloth that's been folded several times, and then a double filter strainer. This helps to remove those particulates, and then we're going to chill this and put it through an additional cleaning process. So after the first rendering, we're going to take our chilled block of rendered fat, and we're going to scrape and remove any impurities from the bottom of that pan. And so I put it in the freezer. That allows the gelatin to solidify, as well as any particulates to solidify in the water, and I can just scrape that right from the bottom. I find this to be the easiest way to clean this up. We want to remove any browning, yellow, gelatin, any solids or particulates that are there. And we're basically just prepping this for a second rendering. And once we've cleaned it up good, it's going to go back in the oven for yet another rendering. We're going to melt that down again, probably add another cup to 2 cups of water for the second rendering, and then we'll do this all over again. Just remember, when this goes back into the oven, we're somewhere between 160 and 200 degrees. All right. And once we've cleaned that up to the point that that looks nice and white, the whiter the appearance, the longer your shelf stability. And that's what we're really after. Break that in half. You can see throughout that we have a nice clean white beef tallow. And we're going to render that down one more time just so we can pour it into glass jars. And we're done with the tallow. So to prepare this block of tallow for its final rendering, we want to just clean it up a little bit. So you can see there's a little yellow there. We're going to take that out either using some pure cotton cheesecloth, or my favorite is just a rough paper towel. And I'm literally just going to take that and run it over several times to clear off the last of that yellow. Now I've gone over this with a knife and I've scraped off any of the brown, removed any spots and any sediment, and now I'm just using that rough paper towel to finally remove any of the last beef gelatin and yellow that might remain. And we'll render this one more time and then get that in a jar. So this is the third time that this beef fat has been rendered. And so we're going to take it out. This is the last rendering that broke conveniently. You can see that's nice and white. There's still a little bit of very little impurity here on the bottom. We're going to remove that. And we're going to melt this back down. And that's mostly from the water. There was still some water in the pan on this last rendering, which I don't add water on my final render. The purer and the whiter your finished tallow, the more shelf stable it is, the less odor it will have. So depending on how you're using it, if you're using it cosmetically or if you're using it right away, if you need it for long-term storage, all of that's going to affect how many times that you might want to render it and so forth. So this is multi-use. I'm putting it into small jars and it'll be used for salves and so forth, packed just to use in the field or on camping trips. I think the rest of those are just air. So another little thing that I do, take some fresh absorbent paper towel and just use that to wipe away. And just identify any additional impurities that might have settled to the bottom. And what we end up with is a beautiful, creamy bar of tallow. Now we're ready to put this in a pot again. And I'm going to just render that down one last time. And once that's melted, we're going to pour that into jars for storage. Your purified tallow has a nearly indefinite shelf life no matter how you store it. Wrap it thoroughly, put it in jars, especially if you're using it for things like seasoning iron or weather protecting your high carbon steel knives or weatherproofing or waterproofing materials. So there's so many uses for tallow. I hope that you'll find this to be a very simple approach and you'll try it and utilize the fat left over from your beef when you're processing. So this is just small batch processing. It's easy to do. Absolutely anybody can do this. Please click subscribe and share.